congratulations, David, on another successful project.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad it's out in the world.
Excellent. Yeah, I checked it out a couple of times. First time watching the movie, second time listening for your scores, of course.
Oh, great.
Hey, so tell us what brought you on, how and why you were brought on board for Hillbilly Elegy.
Well, I think it was something I knew was coming around. I've worked with Hans Zimmer for a number of projects now, and this was something that I thought would be really, really interesting. So I think I would say it was somewhere between being invited and pushing myself onto the project, just because I knew it would be great. I knew working with Ron would be fantastic, and and also I think Hans just thought it would be a really good fit for the two of us to do a movie like this, and I think that was right.
This film, after watching it and looking through your, filmography of scores and music composition, this film is entirely different from a lot of the stuff you actually did. So how did you want to carefully approach something like this, which is a little bit more somber, a little bit more dramatic?
Well, it's the kind of project, the kind of film I enjoy watching, and I think, from our earliest discussions between Hans and myself, I think we both had an idea in mind of how the music could sound. At the very beginning, there were meetings with Ron, and there was a lot of discussions about sort of the regional characteristics. Do we use banjo? Do we not use banjo? I think what we settled on was something called banjo adjacent, where it seems like there might be a banjo nearby, but we never actually pick it up. But more importantly than that, was the idea of the Vance family and really connecting to this family story. It wasn't so much about the music of Appalachia or kind of how literal to get with that musical culture, because it is so rich, and you really need to know what you're doing if you're going to go down that route. It was more about let's capture this journey, because the journey of this family could be the journey of any family, and JD as a character, he's just like any kid growing up. It's this push and pull. Do I want to break out? But I'm still connected so strongly to the people who raised me. So I think for us, it was more about keying into that and kind of that universal struggle that exists in most families.
It's funny, is because when you hear the title of the movie, the very first thing you would think would be banjo, but I think right. You relied a lot more on string instruments for this.
Yeah. It was, it was a combination of things. It ended up being more about the right players than the specific instruments themselves. Like an early collaborator we had was Ben Powell, who's this incredible violinist and has this real, he's a classically trained violinist from the UK, but he has this real reverence for this culture. And so we could sort of, in the early days, explore that and all jam together. And then towards the end, when we were all in our separate physical realities, locked down, even though we weren't able to record a full orchestra because of the circumstances, it actually presented a whole series of possibilities that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of to begin with. Like, for instance, we were able to have Derek Trucks, who's this world famous, one of the best slide guitarists in the world, Allman Brothers pedigree, Tedeschi Trucks band, just this fantastic slide guitarist, wasn't able, unfortunately, like a lot of musicians wasn't able to tour at the beginning of the lockdown, and still they aren't able to. But the one silver lining of that was that, you know, he was game to play on this film score, which is something that I don't think he'd ever done, and maybe you know, he wasn't somebody that we would automatically think you know, would do something like this. So you know, casting players like that, especially in the circumstances of not being able to get in a room with people, ended up being the thing that I think informed the sound more than anything.
I didn't realize that you and Hans actually scored this during the lockdown. How was that, like, even more challenging? Did you have more time to work on it, or what, was it much more slower pace?
Well, we sort of spanned the lockdown. We started together, and you know, having meetings with Ron, and kind of jamming those initial ideas together, and then, you know, sort of at the halfway point, which is a pretty critical point usually. That's when all of a sudden we had to kind of retreat into our homes, and you know, at first, of course, all you are thinking about are the challenges, because we did have plans to have an orchestra, but again, the challenges just kind of changed, you know, as we talked and had lots of conversations with Ron and the whole team. The challenges sort of became possibilities, and actually, I think led it to be something more appropriate for this story, because instead of this kind of traditional and anonymous large group, we really feature soloists throughout the score. And everyone was able to record remotely in their own homes. We had someone in Texas, someone in Las Vegas, someone in the UK. Derek was in Jacksonville, Florida. So, you know, just like the rest of the filmmaking process, because we were doing all our meetings on Zoom, everything happened remotely. And you know, we've done this a lot since, and I know other composers have as well. But for us, this was the first kind of foray into how are we going to get this done. And to be honest, you know, I think it's fared better. The result is more fitting to this film, that we had those restrictions.
How was that overall experience for you? Was it an enjoyable experience, or do you really miss you know, large orchestras?
I mean, large orchestras those are always so much fun, and such a luxury to be able to you know, to be involved and hear music on that scale. But you know, it really is story specific. So something like this really benefits. You know, I'm looking forward to the next time I can be in a big hall with you know, dozens of great, fantastic musicians all playing and making that big sound. But it's not always the sound the story calls for. So you know, I trust it'll happen at the right time for the right film.
Now, for yourself, how did you got into this business in the first place? What, you always wanted to be a music composer?
Yes and no. I you know, I started out playing piano, and I wasn't a good piano student because I kept changing the notes of anything I was supposed to play, which was probably an early sign that I wanted to write. But then, you know, I grew up playing in bands and working in a video store when that was still a thing, and kind of immersing myself in both worlds. But I started to have a feeling that, you know, this was some way I could combine these things. And even growing up in New York, I started to know about, started to look into the film composers, and learned about Hans, and kind of knew this is where I wanted to end up. I ended up winning this film scoring competition that BMI did, you go work with Mike Post for 6 weeks. And he was encouraging and just said, you know what, just move out to Los Angeles. You'll figure it out. And I did, and ended up working out of Hans's studio sort of through a series of circumstances. And I've been working around there ever since, and been a lot of films in the past few years. Yeah, it's, you know, I think some people get into this because they really love to play music, and they see this as a way that they can compose music and get their music out there. For me, even as a young kid, it's always been about story and how to express story. And for me, rather than story being my way into a music career, it was more like music was my way into a career revolving around telling stories.
So how did your path get into Hans? So basically, after you won that BMI, you got to work with Hans. What was the first session with Hans was like for you? Can you recall that?
Well, when I started at Hans' studio, I wasn't working with Hans. I was working for another composer named Otley Orderson, and so there was a lot of time spent around Hans, but I didn't really get involved working with him specifically until Blue Planet 2, which was a project that we did together. I do have one funny story about Hans, and he probably wouldn't remember this, but in the early days when I was working with Otley, I randomly got pulled into a Hans session because he had heard that I knew how to play trumpet, which was half true. I played trumpet when I was in the 6th grade, and I probably knew like 5 notes, but nothing other than that. It was, but it wasn't. It was just a session to be filmed for an animation. So I remember coming into the session, getting this sheet of music paper put in front of me. That was like the hardest trumpet part that you could imagine, and just absolutely massacring these few bars. Hans wasn't in the room at the time, and I didn't know him well at that point, but I passed him in the halls a couple days later, and I remember he stopped me, he sort of grabbed me by the shoulder, and he said, I hear you're quite the trumpet player. So that's a very early memory I have, but always good times with Hans. He's a really inspiring collaborator, and I feel so lucky and fortunate that we get to essentially play in a band together.
You work with them in so many projects because a lot of people, when they think of you, they think of Hans at the same time. So how does that working relationship actually works, and how did it work for Hillbilly here?
Well, Hillbilly, he really let me, take the ball and run with it, because I was so passionate about sort of what I thought the score could be, and I had all these ideas but it's always different variations of the same thing, which goes back to what I said before about his view is we're all in a band together, and if he's like the ideal lead singer of the band always, because he's got these huge ideas, and ultimately he wants to collaborate, and he wants to treat it as play, which is a really fun energy to be around, a really inspiring energy. And the other thing that I share with Hans is this feeling that something could always be better, something could always be a little more interesting. And again, it's experimentation. Let's leave the laboratory doors open as long as possible. And if you're not having fun and something's not exciting, then it's probably not the right thing that you're doing. So yeah, in a way, Hillbilly was no different, except for we were doing it sort of as an equal collaboration.
So how do you personally like to choose your projects? Because you like to mention that story is the basically the prime requisite, but isn't is also the movie and the directors themselves also requisites for something like this?
Well, yeah, of course, but that's it all goes back to the same thing. I mean, you know, Ron, for instance, is his his lens was so trained on the Vance family as the central, you know, part of the Hillbilly Elegy story. You know, which tells us how to approach the music as well, because there's a lot of different ways, you know, a director can frame a script. It's not a story is not the words alone. It's really what the director chooses. It's what the editors are focusing on, and ultimately what we can help them with. I mean, you know, for instance, on Hillbilly, it always went back to this idea of this is an emotional epic. This is three generations of this family. We need the music to help glue all of this together, and you know, that's ultimately our jobs. We're all there sort of chipping away at this block, trying to say, well, what is the story? How can we help tell it? How can we help give this thing shape? So you know, and it's fantastic when you can work with, you know, storytellers as gifted as Ron Howard, because it really doesn't get better than him.
Absolutely, and I'm just curious. So we know you kind of play the piano. You you sort of play the trumpet. What other instruments you play
Yeah,
personally?
I don't even think you could say I sort of play the trumpet. It's not even close. Yeah, I can get around on quite a few instruments. You know, like a lot of film composers, we end up kind of playing the computer most of the day, and really acting as producers of whatever we record. You know, thankfully, I'm able to work with brilliant musicians so that I don't have to play everything. You know, it was nice on Hillbilly Elegy. I think I recorded quite a lot of the guitars and played the piano parts and and but really the fun for me is putting it all together and hopefully getting some musicians who actually know what they're doing, because I am not a disciplined enough player to be the only one playing on these scores.
So it's all about collaboration. Is
Absolutely, absolutely.
well, let me start wrapping things up, because one of the things that a lot of people are going to be curious about is that you and Hans are working on some very big projects like the Wonder Woman, Top Gun, and Dune,
Yeah.
and Wonder Woman obviously is coming out later on this month, so you're obviously done with that. But with the other big projects, especially during times like this, I mean, how do you guys manage to accomplish all of this without the large orchestra, without the large meetings and all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, again, each one of these presented you know, different opportunities to tell the story in a different way. I mean, Wonder Woman we did quite a while ago, so that was done with a large orchestra, and again, that was the appropriate thing for that movie. I don't want to spoil anything about Dune or Top Gun, but I think again, focused on players who can bring out a certain sound, a certain idea. I really don't want to say too much, and it's not even a thing about it being secret. I just want everyone to be surprised and excited for the final product, because um, it's a really great film.
Absolutely. Well, let me wrap it up with one more thing here, because obviously we're speaking to each other via Zoom. I would love to sit down and have this conversation, one on one. But how are you staying creative and sane during times like this?
Yeah, great question. In some ways, the studio lifestyle hasn't changed a whole lot, to be honest. You know, you're still going in and you're by yourself in the studio for long hours every day. Um, but honestly, it's it's keeping those lines of communication open. It's very especially, you know, when you think about it as playing in a band, you have to be communicative with the other people in the band. And luckily enough, with the project that we're on right now, we're getting tested like every 2 days, so we're able to see each other occasionally for meetings. So it's keeping the lines of communication open, but you know, also, you know, being trapped in your home, being able to catch up on movies that you haven't seen or music that you've been meaning to listen to has been really great. And you know, it is funny. Obviously, I can't wait to get back in the studio with everybody and record big orchestras and things like that. But it is funny how sometimes, and I think this is true with producing music in general, restrictions can really open up possibilities. And I've found that the past few months have been a perfect example of that.
Absolutely. Well, David, hey, this is a terrific conversation, and hopefully I get to talk to you again on your, you know, larger and bigger upcoming projects.
Great. Thank you so much, Gig. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Bye now.
Bye.